You know Al Capone's name. Everyone does. He was a gangster. A big one. The kind of guy who made headlines, usually bad ones. Think prohibition, think bootlegging, think violence in Chicago. He was not a good guy by any measure. He built an empire on illegal booze and fear. That's the Al Capone most people remember. It's the picture we all have in our heads, but then something else happened in America. Well, something big and bad. It was the Great Depression. This wasn't just a tough time. It was an awful time. Jobs disappeared, money vanished, people lost their homes. They didn't have enough to eat, families went hungry. Men who used to work hard and provide for their kids were now standing in bread lines. The whole country was hurting. It was a crisis that touched almost everyone. Imagine Chicago then, a huge city, full of people. And so many of them were suffering. They were cold, they were hungry, they had nowhere to turn. The government wasn't set up yet to handle something this big. There weren't the safety nets we have today. People were on their own, they were desperate. In times like that, strange things can happen to how people see others. When things are really bad, people look for help anywhere they can get it. They look for heroes, or sometimes they just look for anyone who seems to be doing something. Even if that someone is a notorious criminal, the lines between right and wrong can get blurry when your stomach is empty. This is where Al Capone comes back into the story. He was a criminal, no doubt, but he was also a very public figure. He had money, a lot of it, and in a time when almost no one had money, that made him stand out. He lived large while others starved. People knew he was powerful, and people knew he could get things done, even if those things were illegal. So, in the middle of this terrible time, a story started to get around. A very surprising story. It was about Al Capone, the gangster, the man behind so much crime. He was supposedly running a soup kitchen, a place where hungry people could get a hot meal for free. It sounded almost impossible. A gangster known for his ruthlessness, feeding the poor. It just didn't fit the image. But the idea took hold. It created a ripple. It made people stop and think, could it be true? Could a man like Capone, who caused so much trouble, also do something genuinely good? This story, whether completely true or partly true, showed how desperate people were. And it showed how the public mind can twist and turn when times are hard. It set the stage for a very different look at Al Capone, even if it was just for a moment. It made people wonder if there was more to him than just the headlines about crime and violence. This was the beginning of a strange side to his legend. So, did Al Capone actually run a soup kitchen? This is the big question, and the simple answer is yes. He did fund one. It opened its doors in late 1930. The Great Depression was hitting hard by then. People were really struggling. Capone, or rather his organization, opened this place in Chicago. It was at 935 South State Street. It wasn't like Capone himself was there every day stirring pots. That's not how it worked. He wasn't wearing an apron. But his money, his influence, was behind it. His people set it up, they managed it, and they paid for everything. That's the important part. It was definitely connected to him. The soup kitchen opened to feed the hungry, and there were so many hungry people then. It offered very simple meals. Things like coffee, and donuts, and, of course, soup. Hot meals were a luxury for many. Just getting a warm cup of coffee could mean a lot on a cold Chicago day. They offered 2 free meals a day, breakfast and dinner. The place got busy fast. It served a lot of people. Some reports say it fed thousands every day. Estimates go up to 3,000 people daily. Think about that. 3,000 men, women, and children lining up getting a free meal. All paid for by a gangster. It was a massive operation for a private charity at the time. News of it spread. The newspapers in Chicago, and even further, picked up the story. It was a big deal. Al Capone, the public enemy number one, was feeding the poor. It was a jarring image. Reporters went there, they saw the lines of hungry people. They saw the food being served. They saw the simple setup. It was real. It wasn't just a rumor. The soup kitchen had a big sign outside. It clearly said free soup, coffee, and donuts. It was a bold statement in a city full of suffering, and it wasn't hidden away. It was out in the open. People knew who was behind it. They knew it was Capone's money. This wasn't some small, quiet act of charity. This was a visible, organized effort to feed a lot of people. And it came at a time when other groups, even the city government, were struggling to provide for everyone. Capone stepped into a huge gap. He filled a need that no one else seemed to be meeting on that scale, at least not at that moment. So, while he might not have personally ladled soup, his connection was clear. His organization provided the funding, the staff, and the place. And it served a real purpose for many people who had nothing. It was a concrete act. It really happened. This wasn't just a story people made up later. It was documented. And it definitely caught a lot of attention. It made people talk, and it made people wonder. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Why would Al Capone, a man who built his fortune on violence and breaking the law, suddenly open a soup kitchen? People have talked about this for a long time. It's not a simple answer. There are a few ways to look at it. One big reason often suggested is public relations. Capone was famous, but he was famous for being bad. The public saw him as a gangster, a killer, someone who ran illegal businesses. He was public enemy number one, as the papers often called him. That's not a great image. Even for a gangster, image can matter. He was under a lot of pressure from the government. The feds were always after him. They wanted to shut him down. So running a soup kitchen could be a way to clean up his act, to show a different side, to make people think he wasn't all bad. If people saw him as someone who helped the poor, maybe they'd be less eager to see him in jail. Maybe it would make the public, and even some officials, go a little easier on him. It's a classic move. Do something good to distract from all the bad you're doing. It was a calculated move to gain some public sympathy, to make himself seem like a human being, not just a monster. Another thought is that he might have been trying to avoid government scrutiny. The government was looking hard at his finances. They were trying to get him on tax evasion. If he was seen as a charitable person, someone who gave back to the community, maybe it would make the government's case against him seem less urgent. Or maybe it would just make people question why they were going after someone who was doing good for the city. It was a defensive strategy in a way. An attempt to show he was contributing to society, even if his other contributions were far less positive. Then there's the idea that maybe, just maybe, he had some genuine desire to help. This is harder to prove, but even criminals are human. They might have a conscience. They might see the, suffering around them and feel something. Capone grew up poor himself. He knew what it was like to struggle. He saw thousands of people just like he used to be, but in a much worse situation. It's possible a part of him genuinely wanted to alleviate some of that pain. It might have been a small part buried under layers of ruthlessness, but it's not impossible to imagine. Some people even called him a Robin Hood figure, like the outlaw who stole from the rich to give to the poor. Capone didn't exactly steal from the rich to feed the poor. He stole from pretty much everyone through his illegal rackets. But he did use some of that money to feed the poor. This idea made him a complicated character in the public mind. A criminal, yes, but one who sometimes did good things. This duality was fascinating to people. It was also a way to gain loyalty. If you feed thousands of people, those people remember it. They might not love you, but they're grateful. And in a city where Capone needed eyes and ears, and sometimes silence, having a grateful public could be useful. It built a sort of grassroots support, even if it was just based on people needing food. So, it wasn't just one reason. It was probably a mix of things. A big part was almost certainly about public relations and trying to fend off the government. But you can't completely rule out a sliver of genuine charity. Whatever the real mix of motives, the act itself was a smart move for Capone. It bought him some good press, it showed he had power and resources, and it fed a lot of hungry people. It was a calculated machination wrapped in a blanket of good deeds. When Al Capone's soup kitchen opened, the public didn't know what to think. It was a strange situation. On one hand, people were starving, they needed help. And Capone was offering it. For the people who lined up, day after day, for a hot meal, it didn't matter so much who was paying. What mattered was the food in their bellies. They were grateful. You can't argue with hunger. And you can't argue with someone who helps fill it. But on the other hand, everyone knew who Capone was. They knew about his crimes. They knew about the violence. They knew his money came from illegal booze and gambling. So there was this big conflict. How could a man so bad do something so good? It created a lot of mixed feelings. Newspapers reported it, some glorified him for it, others pointed out the irony, the hypocrisy. They questioned his motives just like we are now, but the pictures of the long lines of people, sometimes in the snow, waiting for food, spoke louder than any words. Those images showed the reality of the Depression, and they showed that someone, even Capone, was doing something concrete. For the average person, it was a complicated feeling. If your child was hungry and Capone's soup kitchen was the only place to get a meal, you would go. You wouldn't think twice. You'd be thankful for the food, but that didn't mean you thought Capone was a good man overall. It just meant he did a good thing in that moment. It was a very pragmatic response to a desperate situation. The government, though, had a different reaction. They weren't fooled. President Herbert Hoover was trying to crack down on organized crime. Al Capone was a symbol of that crime. The government saw the soup kitchen for what it probably was, a public relations stunt. They weren't going to let a few good deeds erase all the illegal activities. They kept up their pursuit of him. They didn't see him as a new kind of philanthropist. They saw him as a criminal trying to buy goodwill. Did it work to soften his image in the long run? Not really. Capone eventually went to prison, not for murder or bootlegging, but for tax evasion. The government got him on his money. The soup kitchen didn't save him from that. It didn't change the fact that he was a powerful and dangerous gangster, but the story of the soup kitchen did become a part of his legend. It added a strange layer to the myth of Al Capone. It made him more complex. It showed that even people who are deeply involved in crime can sometimes, for whatever reason, do something that looks like charity. It showed that things are rarely black and white. This act, this one instance of feeding the poor, has lasted in history. People still talk about it. It stands out because it's so unexpected. It's hard to imagine the brutal gangster also being the guy who makes sure thousands of hungry people get a meal. This contradiction is what makes the story so sticky. It's what makes it fascinating. It challenges our ideas about good and evil. It leaves a lasting mark on how we remember him, even if it's a small, strange part of a much bigger, darker story. It gives people something to talk about, even decades later. The soup kitchen, while important to Capone's image, was just a small piece of his life. It was a moment in time, a reaction to a huge crisis. It doesn't define the man. To understand Al Capone, you have to look at the whole picture, and that picture is mostly very dark. His main business was crime. He ran a huge bootlegging operation during Prohibition. That's how he made his millions. He controlled speakeasies. He made and sold illegal alcohol. He used violence to keep control. Rival gangs were killed. People were intimidated. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, where 7 rival gang members were gunned down, is the most famous example of his gang's brutality. This was the real Capone. The soup kitchen existed alongside all of that. It didn't replace it. Did Capone do other good deeds? Not really in the same public or organized way. He wasn't known for being a regular philanthropist. The soup kitchen was unique. It stood out because it was so public and so large scale. Any other charitable acts would have been small, personal, or hidden, not something designed to make headlines and influence public opinion. The soup kitchen was a special case. It was a strategic move rather than a genuine change in character. His downfall came, as we know, not from the murders or the bootlegging. The government couldn't get enough direct evidence for those things. Instead, they got him on tax evasion. He hadn't paid taxes on his vast illegal income. In 1931, he was arrested and then convicted. He went to Alcatraz, the infamous island prison. He spent years there. His health declined, partly due to syphilis. He died in 1947, a shadow of his former powerful self. The soup kitchen was long forgotten by many, certainly by the government, once he was behind bars. But the story of the soup kitchen lives on. It's part of the lore of Al Capone. It shows up in books, documentaries, and even sometimes in movies. Why? Because it's so contradictory. It's a fascinating paradox. The ultimate bad guy doing something good. It makes him seem more human, more complex than just a flat-out villain. It's a way for people to grapple with the idea that individuals are not always one thing or another. They can be many things, sometimes good and sometimes terrible, all at once. The soup kitchen highlights the strange relationship between criminals and society, especially during desperate times. When institutions fail, people sometimes turn to unexpected places for help. And sometimes those who profit from society's weaknesses also offer a band-aid solution. It's a cynical view, but a realistic one. Ultimately, the soup kitchen incident shows us how powerful a single act can be in shaping a person's legend. It doesn't erase the mountain of his crimes, it doesn't make him a hero, but it does add a particular shade to his character. It reminds us that history is often messy. People are messy. And even the most notorious figures can have moments, or at least strategically create moments, that defy our expectations. It's a powerful story not because it redeemed him, but because it shows the complexity of human nature and the desperate times in which it happened. The legend of Al Capone, the gangster who fed the hungry, remains a strange and enduring part of American history.